My husband's work trip was a lie. I tracked him to a beach resort with my childhood best friend. He was holding her belly, kissing her, saying our baby's gonna be beautiful. Meanwhile, I had $43 because he drained our account. She told me, "You just paid the bills," he texted. "Sorry you found out like that." But then I sent a package to his office that said, "Congrats on the baby, DNA not included." I still remember the exact second my heart broke, not the slow kind of heartbreak, but the kind that hits like a blunt object to the chest. It was 3:42 p.m. on a Thursday. I was sitting on our couch, staring at the little blinking dot on Life 360. My husband, Eli, was supposed to be in Chicago for a 3-day corporate strategy retreat. He'd left that morning in a suit, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "Don't forget to pay the rent today, babe." Except the rent money wasn't there. When I checked our joint account, it showed $43.12. I thought it was a glitch. But no, he'd transferred almost everything out. My stomach sank so fast I had to sit down. I called him, texted him, emailed him, no answer. That's when I clicked on his location again. He wasn't in Chicago. He was at a beach resort in Clearwater, Florida. A luxury one, the kind with cabanas, champagne brunches, and $800 a night ocean view suites. I remember zooming in on the map and thinking, what the hell are you doing there? I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, maybe a business event moved locations. But then I refreshed. His dot moved, toward the beachfront bar. My heart started pounding. Something in me snapped. So I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and drove straight to the airport. I used my emergency credit card, the one he didn't know I still had, and booked the first flight to Tampa. By the time I arrived, it was dusk. The air smelled like salt and sunscreen. I checked into a cheap motel nearby and walked toward the resort. My hands were shaking so bad I had to keep them in my pockets. And that's when I saw them. Eli and her. Mara, my childhood best friend. We'd grown up together, shared clothes, secrets, birthdays. She was like a sister. And there she was, standing barefoot in the sand, wearing a white sundress, smiling as he kissed her. His hands were on her belly. Her pregnant belly. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I heard him whisper, I swear to God, I heard it, "Our baby's gonna be beautiful." My world just stopped spinning. Everything inside me turned to ice. I didn't make a scene. I didn't run up or scream. I just stood there until they walked away, laughing like I was a ghost that never existed. That night, I texted her from a fake number. "Does he know you're sleeping with your best friend's husband?" She replied almost instantly. "He was never yours. You just paid the bills." The next morning, he texted me one line that burned into my mind forever. "Sorry you found out like that." But I didn't reply, not yet, because by then I already knew exactly what I was going to do, and it started with a package I mailed to his office that Friday morning. It had no return address, just his name. And inside, Eli and I met when I was 23, fresh out of college, still drowning in student debt and working 2 jobs. He was everything I thought I wanted: charming, confident, and already established in his career at a tech firm. He talked about our future on our 3rd date. He said things like, "You deserve to be taken care of." And for a while, I believed him. We moved in together after a year, got married after 2. He convinced me to quit my side job, said he could handle the finances. It sounded like stability, like love. Looking back now, it was control. Every "I'll take care of it" was just another way to make sure I didn't see what he was really doing. He'd always been close with Mara. Too close. She was my best friend since we were 11, the one who came over for sleepovers, who knew my first crush, who held my hand the night my dad died. When Eli and I started dating, she was happy for me, or at least she acted like it. The first sign I ignored was the way she'd tease him, calling him Mr. Perfect. The second was how she started dressing up more whenever we hung out. The third was when Eli started bringing her up in conversations, casually like, "Mara said this," or "Mara tried that new restaurant." Once, I even asked if something was going on between them. He laughed so hard it made me feel stupid for even thinking it. "You're paranoid," he said. "She's like a sister to me." A sister. The worst part is, Mara was the one I vented to when I started noticing red flags in our marriage. I told her about the weird withdrawals, the late nights, the way Eli kept locking his phone. She'd say, "You're overthinking it, girl. Don't ruin a good thing with your imagination." I trusted her. I trusted both of them. Then last month, Eli told me about the work trip. said he'd be gone for a few days, and asked if I could cover rent until his expense reimbursement came in. He even kissed me goodbye and said he'd call from the airport. That night, I cooked his favorite dinner, chicken marsala, and waited for his text. It never came. Over the next 2 days, I called his office twice. The receptionist said he was working remotely. That's when I started feeling that gnawing pit in my stomach, the one that told me everything was about to crash. The discovery, the location tracking, the resort, the pregnancy, that was the explosion. But the foundation for this betrayal had been built brick by brick over years of quiet manipulation. When I flew home after catching them, my apartment felt smaller. His absence was everywhere, his jacket on the chair, his toothbrush, the half-empty bottle of whiskey he'd left on the counter. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up every bank statement from the past 6 months. That's when I saw it, transfers labeled with consulting payments, sent to an account under Mara's name. Thousands of dollars. That's when the rage replaced the heartbreak. I stopped thinking like a wife. I started thinking like a woman who'd been robbed, lied to, and humiliated. The package I sent him was just the beginning. Inside it, I placed something he'd never expect, something that would make him sweat the moment he opened it. The package was simple, plain brown box, typed label, no fingerprints. I mailed it to his office through priority shipping. I wanted him to open it surrounded by coworkers, where he couldn't hide the look on his face. Inside, I'd placed 3 things: a printed photo of him and Mara on that beach, his hands on her belly; a copy of our bank statement, highlighted where the consulting payments went to her account; a single note that said, "Your lies are now my job." I knew he'd panic. He always did when he lost control. Sure enough, 2 hours after the package was delivered, he called. I didn't answer. Then came the texts, one after another. "Why would you do that? Can we talk in private? Please, don't make a scene." I didn't reply to any of them. That night, I got an email from his boss. A polite, corporate tone, the kind that hides panic behind professionalism. "Hi, we received some concerning material today involving personal matters between you and Eli. Could you clarify the situation?" That was my first small win, the first crack in his perfect facade. The next few days were chaos. Mutual friends started calling. Word spread faster than I expected, or maybe that's what happens when betrayal finally surfaces after years of pretending everything's fine. Some friends took his side, saying I'd gone too far. But the ones who knew me, the ones who saw the exhaustion behind my fake smiles, told me to keep going. I didn't stop. I started digging deeper. Mara had always bragged about her consulting business, even though I'd never seen her work a single real job. So I looked it up and found that her so-called business was just a shell LLC with Eli listed as the financial sponsor. Every penny he drained from our account was feeding her fake company. I took screenshots, filed a report with the bank for unauthorized transfers, and froze what was left of our joint savings. Legally, it was still half mine. He couldn't touch a cent now. Then I called his HR department, told them I was his wife, that he'd used company funds for consulting expenses tied to a personal relationship. I didn't even have to say affair. They filled in the blanks themselves. By the next morning, his corporate card was suspended. He showed up at our apartment 2 days later, looking wrecked, unshaven, wearing the same wrinkled shirt from that beach photo. I didn't open the door. He stood outside for nearly an hour, alternating between begging and threatening. At one point he said, "You're destroying my life." And I said through the door, "You already destroyed mine." That silence that followed, that deep, defeated silence, was the sound of him realizing I wasn't the same woman he left behind. But here's the thing, I hadn't even started yet. Because while he was spiraling, I was uncovering something else, something Mara had done behind his back too. Something that made this whole situation darker than I ever imagined. It started with a message from an unknown number. "Hey, I think I know what Mara's been hiding from both of you." The message came late at night. Just one line from an unknown number. No profile photo, no name. I stared at it for a long time before replying. "Who is this?" A few seconds later, they responded. "Let's just say I was in the same position you are now. Check your email." There was an attachment waiting for me, a scanned birth certificate. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. The child's name jumped out first. Lucas James. Mother, Mara Lynn Carter. Father, Eli Carter. Except the date of birth was from 3 years ago. I sat frozen, staring at the screen. 3 years ago, Eli and I were celebrating our second anniversary. He'd taken me to Asheville that weekend. I remember it perfectly because he'd been on his phone the entire time. Work stuff, he said. 3 years ago, while I was toasting to our future, my husband was already a father. To my best friend's child. The room spun. My vision blurred. I had to set my laptop down before I threw it across the room. When I finally pulled myself together, I called the number back. The voice that answered was shaky, female, young. She said her name was Samantha, that she'd once worked with Eli and Mara. She sounded terrified. They scammed me, she said. They told me to set up fake invoices for Mara's consulting, business so Eli could write off personal expenses through his company. I did it because I needed the job. But when I asked questions, Mara threatened to sue me for fraud. I felt my stomach drop. So it wasn't just an affair, Samantha laughed bitterly. It was a business partnership built on lies. You weren't the only one he stole from, but you're the only one who can destroy him legally. That's when I realized the magnitude of what they'd done. It wasn't just betrayal, it was fraud, embezzlement, deceit all the way down. And it had been going on for years. The child changed everything. It made their betrayal real in a way I hadn't let myself imagine. While I was crying over late payments, Eli had been paying for their private pediatrician visits, daycare, a little house near Sarasota. Everything, I didn't even know how to process it. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to crawl under a blanket and disappear. But then, and I'll never forget this, something cold and sharp settled in me instead. It was focus. That's when I started the real retaliation. I reached out to a lawyer, one who specialized in financial abuse and marital fraud. I showed her everything, the statements, the transfers, the emails, even the birth certificate. She didn't even blink. She said, "We're not just going for divorce, we're going for blood." The next day, I filed for separation and froze every joint asset he hadn't already drained. Then I had the locks changed and told the building manager not to let him in under any circumstances. When Eli found out, he went ballistic. He showed up at my work, red-faced, shouting that I was ruining his reputation. My boss had to call security, but he didn't know, not yet, that his entire professional world was about to cave in too. Because I'd just forwarded every piece of evidence to his company's compliance department. And a week later, he got served. Not by me, by them. The day Eli got served, I watched it happen from my car across the street from his office. I know that sounds petty, but I needed to see it, that exact second his fake confidence cracked. The process server handed him the envelope. He opened it right there on the sidewalk, squinting at the pages, and I could see the panic spread through his body. His shoulders tightened. His jaw twitched. He looked around like someone who just realized the walls were closing in. That was the company's investigation notice and a subpoena for financial records. His boss had forwarded my entire evidence package to corporate counsel. Every fraudulent consulting payment, every expense report tied to Mara's LLC, it was all under review. He was officially suspended pending investigation. Meanwhile, my lawyer and I were playing chess. Every move had to be precise. We filed a motion to seize assets tied to the fraud, including the Sarasota property Mara was living in. The lawyer said, "You might not get all your money back, but you can make sure they lose everything." I didn't want money anymore. I wanted accountability. I started contacting the other people who'd been affected. Remember Samantha, the former employee? She connected me with two more. A freelance accountant who'd been pressured to falsify tax filings, and an HR coordinator who'd seen Eli's expense reports but was too scared to report him. Now they weren't scared anymore. We built a case so airtight even Eli couldn't wriggle out of it. Every document, every payment, every signature. My lawyer said, "When this hits, his career's done." At night, I couldn't sleep. I'd sit in the dark at my kitchen table, staring at old photos of us, vacations, birthdays, anniversaries. Every smile looked fake now. I kept thinking, how long was I just a wallet to him? The thought of Mara made it worse. She wasn't some stranger, she'd been in my life for 2 decades. She'd known my passwords, my fears, my dreams, and she'd used all of that to help Eli steal from me. One night, I drove to Sarasota. I parked outside their little blue house, at the end of a quiet street. There was a tricycle in the yard, a wind chime on the porch, a light glowing in the window. I saw them through the curtain, laughing. He was holding the baby. I didn't go in. I just sat there in my car for almost an hour, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. And that's when another idea started forming, something colder, quieter. Not legal revenge, personal revenge. Something that would make them feel the humiliation I'd felt. So I started preparing. I made copies of everything: photos, financial records, texts, the birth certificate. Then I created a new email account with an anonymous name. I drafted one long, detailed message addressed to Eli's entire professional network, board members, clients, and investors. The subject line simply said, "Who you're really doing business with." But I didn't send it. Not yet. Because right before I hit send, I got a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end wasn't Mara's. It wasn't Eli's. It was someone else. And what they told me changed everything I thought I knew about why Eli had betrayed me. The voice on the phone was calm, male, older. "Is this Mrs. Carter?" he asked. I hesitated. "Who's calling?" he said. "You don't know me, but I think you deserve to know why all of this happened. Eli isn't who you think he is. And neither is Mara." I was immediately on guard. "If this is some scam—" "It's not," he interrupted. "I used to work with Eli's father, back when they ran Carter and Associates." That name hit me. Eli had never talked about his father except to say he died when he was a kid. He told me his mom raised him alone, that his dad had checked out early. The man sighed. "That's not true. His father didn't die. He went to prison. Embezzlement, same pattern: dummy corporations, shell accounts, fake consultants. Eli was 17 when it happened. His dad stole millions and got caught, but he didn't just have one accomplice." I could hear paper shuffling on the other end. Then he said quietly, "His accomplice was a woman named Marilyn Carter." I froze. "Wait," I said slowly. "Are you saying—" "Yes," he replied. "Mara isn't just your best friend, she's Eli's half-sister. Different mothers, same father. She changed her last name after the scandal." My entire body went cold. "No," I whispered. But it made sense. Their weird closeness, the way they always defended each other, the way Eli got uncomfortable whenever I asked about his family. I remembered one time, years ago, when Mara said, "You have no idea what it's like growing up in that house." I thought she was talking about her alcoholic stepdad. Turns out she meant their father. The man continued, "They've been working together for years. Eli's father started teaching him the ropes before prison. When he got out, Mara reconnected with Eli. They learned to hide money, start shell companies, move funds. This wasn't about love or an affair, it was about building their own operation, using you to keep it clean." I felt sick. "So, the baby," he hesitated. "There's a reason that doesn't make sense either. From what I know, that child isn't Eli's, it's his father's. The old man moved to Florida after his release. They visit him often. The timeline fits." My throat closed, my vision blurred again. I couldn't process what I was hearing, it was too much. The affair, the fraud, the manipulation, and now this. "They've been using the company, your marriage, and that child as cover," he said. "And now that the company's investigating Eli, they'll probably disappear. I thought you should know before that happens." He hung up before I could ask more. I sat in silence for what felt like hours. The idea that Mara was his half-sister, that their entire relationship was built on lies inherited from a criminal father, it rewired everything I thought I understood. And yet, it explained everything. The emotional distance. The way Mara always acted like she had power over him. The way Eli always caved to her. They weren't partners in love, they were partners in crime. By morning, I had a new goal. Not just to destroy Eli's career, but to make sure both of them, and their twisted legacy, would never recover. When I finally forced myself to think beyond fury, beyond the cold calculus of lawsuits and subpoenas, I realized I'd been asking the wrong question the whole time. I'd been asking who they were. The real question was why they'd trained a life like mine to be useful, to be a wallet, a distraction, a legal smoke screen. The answer came like a slow, horrible dawn. It wasn't about sex. It wasn't about feelings. It was about a business model that treated people like infrastructure. They built a system where loyalty was only useful insofar as it fueled profit and protected the operation. My marriage had been a ledger entry, my love a tax write-off, my stability a clean cover for graft. Eli and Mara, scratch that, Eli and Marilyn weren't improvising. They were repeating a pattern drilled into the family before either of them was old enough to lie convincingly. Their father had done it, and he'd taught both of them how to make theft look like success. The older man's charisma was the kind that rewired moral compasses, charm as training manual, gifts as bribes, closeness as control. They learned that you could engineer entire economies of deceit the way someone else might plant a garden. When I dug into bank ledgers and anonymous tips, a map unfolded. Shell companies layered like Russian dolls, fake client invoices, staged consulting deals, and families, real, gullible, loving families, used as camouflage. They weren't building a legacy of comfort. They were creating a self-protecting machine. Children, houses, daycare, pediatrician bills, all not signs of love, but the visible outputs of a laundering system meant to placate neighbors, investors, and the state. I found a file Mara carelessly left on a shared drive once, an old spreadsheet titled Family Accounts. It listed names, dates, and the exact amounts to be shifted per quarter to maintain plausible living costs. Under notes, one cold line caught my eye. Keep spouse unaware, emotional stability needed for long con. There it was in black and white. I had been cultivated like a crop. My routines, my kindnesses, my naive trust, they weren't incidental. They were optimized. The most horrifying piece. The baby. If the rumor from the man who called me was right, and the timeline and money transfers lined up in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand at attention, then this child existed as both a symbol and a tool. If the old man had fathered that baby, the child doubled as lineage and an anchor that made disappearing riskier for the rest of the network. The family face of the operation gave them untouchable dignity in the suburban neighborhoods they used to hide. A stroller, a school registration, a little league uniform, all buffers against suspicion. Who would expect a con artist to look like PTA mom? That's the cruelty that stays with me. They weaponized normalcy. They made me pay rent with my dignity, and then used the appearance of a happy household to protect the very people who'd stolen from me. When Mara told me, "He was never yours. You just paid the bills," she wasn't being cruel out of a sudden spite. She was stating a strategy. I was a resource they'd allocated and spent, and now that I'd become noisy, they were willing to cut me loose to minimize exposure. There's no softening this. No tragic backstory that redeems them. Their reason wasn't passion or a momentary moral failing. It was deliberation. It was the cold business decision to treat human lives like accounts to be balanced. That's the part that chills me. They didn't have to persuade themselves they were right. They simply calculated the ROI and proceeded. When I see Eli now, sitting in a meeting room that used to hum with code and marketing strategy, I don't see a man in crisis. I see a product of a criminal curriculum, polished for public consumption. When I look at Mara, I don't see my childhood friend. I see the architect who decided I was useful and then disposable. Understanding their reason didn't make the hurt gentler. It made the rage cleaner. It focused the thing I wanted from them, not explanations, not apologies, only consequences. Justice that would strip their operation of dignity, property, and reputation until the only skill they had left was the small, miserable art of survival. I planned everything like a woman who'd learned to be patient because she had no other choice. The law did the heavy lifting, subpoenas, freezes, internal audits, a criminal referral, but I didn't hand them the keys and walk away praying they'd open the right doors. I was there every step, dialing, forwarding, sitting in tiny conference rooms with corporate counsel and my lawyer, watching their faces when the spreadsheets lit up and payroll reconciliations didn't match the happy family stories Eli had fed them. First, I made the fraud visible where it mattered, to people whose reputations could not afford to ignore it. I sent the evidence to board members, to compliance lawyers at the parent company, and to a reporter who had spent a decade on white-collar corruption. The reporter didn't write a puff piece. He wrote a profile that read like a forensic audit: names, dates, amounts, shell companies mapped out with the kind of cold precision that made readers feel small and stupid for trusting appearances. The article hit industry newsletters and LinkedIn feeds like a falling chandelier. Eli's suspension turned into a termination. The board demanded reimbursements and clawbacks. Mara's LLC dissolved overnight when clients started asking for refunds, and the bank closed her accounts. The Sarasota house went into receivership after I filed a motion that tied it directly to diverted company funds. The daycare receipts that once proved family normalcy now read like invoices in an embezzlement scheme. But legal and financial ruin wasn't enough. They had weaponized normal life, strollers, playdates, PTA coffees, as armor. I had to strip that armor in public. I arranged for the anonymous tip that had first sent me the birth certificate to go to child services and family court with the full paper trail. There were terrified social workers and a judge who read dry, clinical reports that smelled of fraud and negligence. The custody picture shifted. The baby's primary guardian was reevaluated by people who didn't care about reputation, only safety and truth. I won't pretend every victory felt sweeping. There were nights I felt hollow in my victories, as if I'd been vindicated in the court of public opinion, but still raw where love had been. I sat with that grief when the newsroom calls stopped and the noise faded. I did the practical things that stitch a life back together. I changed passwords, closed accounts, refiled taxes, and enrolled in a night class to relearn how to support myself without trusting someone else with my financial life. People apologized, some quietly, some loudly, and some never did. Some of my old friends tried to take the moral middle ground. A handful of strangers sent groceries and anonymous cashier's checks. Samantha and the other whistleblowers met me for coffee, hands shaking, faces relieved. We didn't hug much. We'd earned a rough gratitude that felt like a scar. When it was over, when the court enforced judgments and the company posted corrective filings, I went back to the apartment that had once felt like a vault of betrayal and made it mine again. I painted one wall a color I'd wanted for years, not safe beige, but a stubborn, deep green. I hung pictures of me alone and me with friends who deserved the name. I started a side hustle consulting for victims of financial abuse, teaching people how to read bank statements like a lifeline instead of a boredom chore. The last time I saw Eli in person, it was at a corporate hearing. He was hollowed out the way a toy is when the batteries are pulled. Mara wasn't there. She'd moved out of state, her name on the news feeds and court documents like a stain. He made eye contact for a beat, the kind that used to say, "Everything will be okay," and now said nothing at all. I felt nothing heroic in that moment, only a tired, clean air that smelled faintly of salt from that beach where I'd first seen them. I'd wanted revenge that seared, and what I got was steadier. Restitution, exposure, bureaucracy that chewed up their lies until the edges were raw. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't cinematic. But it was fair in the way taxes are fair, slow, unavoidable, final. I closed the file and kept a copy pinned in a drawer. Sometimes I took it out and looked at the spreadsheets and the highlighted lines, not to reopen the pain, but to remind myself I'd learned the math of betrayal and no longer had to be the missing digit. And when I paid my next rent with my own name on the bank transfer, I smiled quietly to myself. The account read, "Paid by me," which, after everything, felt like the smallest, most satisfying revenge of all.